When you become the parents of a newborn baby, you face many decisions. One of the many decisions you'll be facing is whether or not to vaccinate your child. There's a lot of information out there, so I wanted to create a video to try to clearly and concisely put together some information to help you make an informed choice. So, what are the pros and cons of vaccination? The pros of vaccinating your child include protection against diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, polio, Haemophilus influenza B, hepatitis B, pneumococcal conjugate, rotavirus, and meningitis B. The cons include temporary soreness at the injection site. Sometimes the child will get a low-grade fever. Sometimes, apparently, they may get tiredness. Occasionally, they might get an allergic reaction. Very rarely, a severe allergic reaction. Extremely rarely, seizures. And there was concerns over a link with autism, but this has since been disproven. So what do these things actually look like? Let's start with diphtheria.
If you could hear Nora, you would hear her screaming. She is just 4 years old, with a tracheostomy tube robbing her of her voice, but giving her life. It's her only way of breathing while suffering from diphtheria. Her 2 siblings, both sisters, have already died of the highly contagious bacterial infection. Now she's in a hospital isolation ward, watched over by her mother and grandmother as she struggles to breathe.
Amira and Sandos are the 2 that died. We are devastated by it. They died with blood coming out of their mouths in their mother's arms. May they rest in peace.
Diphtheria is known as the strangling angel of children.
Diphtheria sounds really horrible. Okay, let's see temporary soreness at site of injection.
I'm sorry, puppy.
Unpleasant but over quickly. Okay, next on the pros, protection against tetanus.
They were the kind of cuts, infected blisters, and abrasions you'd find on many boys who run around barefooted. Smears were taken from several lesions, but Clostridium tetani was not detected. As tonic spasms occurred, sedation was increased to relieve the extreme pain. Note the tightly locked jaw and risus sardonicus, indicating rapid progression of the disease. The hyperextension of the head and severe arching of the back illustrate well-developed opisthotonos. With advanced hypertonicity, his body became completely rigid. Towards the end of the 3rd day, he showed signs of sputum retention. So he was intubated, paralyzed with curare, and subjected to intensive physiotherapy. Osteotomy is often necessary for prolonged artificial ventilation. In Philip's case, an indwelling nasotracheal portex tube proved entirely satisfactory. On the 8th day, curare was reduced, then discontinued.
Philip eventually made a complete recovery, but was extremely lucky to survive.
Well, tetanus looks horrific. Extreme pain and full body spasms. Let's look at low-grade fever on the cons.
Some vaccinations do cause fever in babies, particularly the DPT vaccine, and the fever is due to the P component or the pertussis component of it. This is expected, this is normal, and it usually subsides within 48 hours, and there is nothing to worry.
So I couldn't find a video of a baby having a fever in response to a vaccine. Liddy had a tiny fever, she was fine. So next up, protection against whooping cough. Going back to the cons of vaccines, I found a video of an allergic reaction, which is, I think, more severe than average, but good to see.
How you doing? We had the Tdap, which is tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. We use an acellular pertussis vaccine here that does have aluminum. It's impossible to get one that doesn't have aluminum. And aluminum is put into vaccines as an adjuvant to irritate the tissue so you get good blood flow to the area so the vaccine works. But once in a while, we get something like this. I drew lines around this. You know, parents, when you see a large reaction like this after a vaccine, it looks like an infection, but it isn't. It's that aluminum, probably the aluminum. There are other ingredients that might be irritating, but the body just comes in and creates this huge response trying to deal with this invader, foreign body, foreign substance. In this case, it's probably the aluminum. And that has spread from the size of a, what was it you said yesterday?
Like a baseball.
So the size of a baseball to the size of a softball overnight in 2 days after the vaccine. And so we're just going to watch this. We can use antihistamines, diphenhydramine, you can use loratadine. If it got really bad, we could do prednisone, ibuprofen for the pain and discomfort. And I would not do this same vaccine again, because once you've had a large local reaction like this, you would be at greater risk for a really bad reaction. So that's just something to think about. Wanted people to have the opportunity to see what a large local reaction looks like after a vaccine. This is a reportable event, so that way we can kind of track how often these things happen. And she's going to be fine, don't you think? Yeah? You want to sit up for a minute? You want to sit up?
And we'll take a look at another vaccine pro, which is protection against polio.
Sew and stitch. The children of Howrah district run around nearby. One finds it difficult to keep up. Rukhsar Khatun is India's last known polio victim, diagnosed with the disease 3 years ago. When she runs, her feet hurt, her father says. Papa, I am tired. Then she has to sit down, he tells us. I feel so bad. Her situation is tough, but it's a lot worse for Meghan Kumar, one of the millions of people in India crippled by polio. He struggled to even get to New Delhi St. Stephen's Hospital, hoping to get surgery so he can at least stand.
It takes the dignity out of a person's life. To be crawling on fours like an animal, I think that's terrible.
So polio leaves you a cripple for life. That's not nice. Okay, next up on the cons, severe allergic reaction. I took a long time trying to find an anaphylactic reaction to a vaccine. I think it says something that I couldn't find a single one, but I did find an anaphylactic reaction to the dairy in paint.
Little Lofton was rushed to the hospital for an anaphylactic reaction. Daycare workers had just dipped his foot in paint for a craft project, paint that apparently had dairy-based ingredients.
So the next pro to look at is protection against Haemophilus influenza B.
A few years ago, our son Matthew, he was 3 years old at the time, complained that he had a pain in his neck. We thought maybe he was developing strep. He had a really high fever and he was sort of like hunched over. And at that point, we took him just to the local hospital.
The pediatric doctor that they were able to get was an older doctor who had been around, and he asked us, a really important question.
Was your son vaccinated? And at the time, he wasn't.
He thought he knew what it was. He said he wasn't positive, but he would know within minutes. And he ordered some x-rays.
The x-rays confirmed that he did have Hib disease.
Hib disease is infection caused by the bacteria Haemophilus influenza type B. Before the vaccine, about 20,000 children got serious Hib disease and about 1,000 died of it.
Matthew's windpipe was closing down quickly.
He said that your son is going to die within minutes.
And he said, quite honestly, we're not in a situation in this particular hospital that we're prepared to help him.
Another terrifying disease. Okay, so now we're on to the extremely rare conditions. Is a seizure. Seizures are more often caused by the viruses that these vaccines prevent than by the vaccines themselves, like a lot more often. So again, I couldn't find a single seizure caused by a vaccine, but here is a seizure caused by something else. It's all right. Come on, buddy. Come on. Come on. I decided to combine these two. The videos were getting a bit long. So here is meningitis.
It seemed like she had the flu. We told her, well, maybe get some Theraflu and get some rest.
And I got a text from a friend of hers that said, Mr. Stelzer, your daughter is in the emergency room. And I said, okay, we're on our way. She's healthy, she's never really been sick, they'll save her and she'll be fine.
The neurosurgeon very quickly came out and told us that they weren't seeing any brain activity.
And then he came back and says, we believe it's bacterial meningitis. It moves so fast in your body that by the time symptoms show up, in her case, there was no way they can save her life. They eradicated it with antibiotics, but it got into her spinal cord, into her brain. And by the time we got there, she was already in a coma and she never came out of it. When he told us that she's basically brain dead.
There was one study questioning a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. This has been followed up by many more studies. These have shown that there is no link between the vaccine and autism. So vaccines do not cause autism. I know a lot of people are scared of the thought of it, so I've included this video to have a look at autism, even though it is not linked to vaccination.
Dad's been by the stroller. We'll get bored. I'll go get him. Hey, come on!
We're now reaching the last mini video, which is about rotavirus.
A few months ago, our 2-year-old daughter had gotten what we thought was just a run-of-the-mill stomach virus and was vomiting and had diarrhea. And she seemed a little better in the morning, and then all of a sudden she just became rapidly worse. I mean, it was just constant vomiting, constant diarrhea. And so we went to the emergency room, and by the time we got there, she was severely dehydrated.
They were really having a hard time putting an IV in her, so they had to stick her like over 10 times.
She was crying and there were no tears, because she was so dehydrated. They tried in her forehead, both of her hands, her feet, her arms, her legs. She got to the point where when she would see someone coming at her with a needle, she would just take her little blanket and cover up her head.
It was one of the toughest things I've ever had to watch.
There was the vascular specialist team that they were talking about calling in to start an IV. They even had said that they may have to drill a hole into her bone marrow. And one of the nurses just said, let me give it a shot, and was able to get an IV started.
Rotavirus is so common that almost no one makes it to the age of 5 without having had this infection. But in the pediatric emergency rooms, we see so many children who end up hospitalized.
All those diseases looked really awful. So what are the risks of getting those diseases versus the risks of getting problems from vaccinations? Well, the more I looked into it, the more I found that the risks of the diseases are going up. There's travel you can get to from places where they happen a lot to places where they haven't happened in a long time. So that brings them over. And then some people aren't vaccinated, so it can spread to a degree within these areas, the UK and America and other areas where you sort of feel safe because they've not been around as much for a while, but they're on the rise, which is scary. And the risks of the vaccines are really, really low. I couldn't even find videos where it had happened, where any of these sort of negative effects had happened to children on the whole of the internet. There was only one localized reaction, which was fairly severe, but compared to the diseases, it was nothing. So yeah, I'm glad I got mine vaccinated because it looks terrifying.